Hey guys, Jono here with the build I'm going to be playing for Phrecia. It's going to be Consecrated Path of Endurance. So we're endurance charge stacking, pretty big slam. Seismic Cry doesn't work in the hideout, but we can get up to max endurance charges here, and it's pretty big. And then the Ancestral Commander has an additional endurance charge, and I believe there's another one or two I'm missing from something as well on this character. I'm on standard with like an older version. This is the character I played in Mercenaries. So it's not going to be exactly what I have in the POB here, but I think it's good enough to show a demo. Yeah, so it's just endurance charge stacking slammer, lots of war cries with auto exertion, and yeah, I guess we'll just go ahead and get right into it here. We're going to run a T17 Abomination. I think most of the strats for Phrecia League are probably going to be T17 or T16.5 strats. So yeah, I just thought I would show what the build is like in those maps. So you can see the AoE gets considerably bigger there. Yeah, I don't know, this might honestly be the best slam for clear. Definitely a lot saying that, but you know, screen wide, it has baked in movement, feels very good for clear. And the single target is not too bad too. See when we get there. Alright, here's the boss. Ooh. So it's still pretty decent single target damage. Did take a lot of damage there. The Ancestral Commander is going to be considerably tankier than this version of the character. And also, I'm using an Ashes of the Stars for damage, but I'm going to swap to the Defiance of Destiny to show how that's going to be, because you get that from the Ascendancy, so you'll actually be able to have both amulets effectively in Phrecia League. So yeah, we'll swap to the Defiance, and then what I thought would be a pretty good map to show for Tankiness was a Harbinger map. A lot of guys all hitting you at once, and then hopefully we'll be able to find some bosses in there too. That's a cool thing about Phrecia. That's probably a strat I'll end up covering during the event. With Harbingers, at least before, it said there was no idle changes, so I assume you'll be able to do this again. You're able to get 100% chance for a Harbinger boss. Yeah, make sure you get, if you're not using a Ralakesh, make sure you get your endurance charges up at the start of the map. Otherwise, you might have some trouble, but yeah. Once you do have the charges, once you do have charges in a Defiance, you are pretty much invincible, at least to a bunch of hits like this. Yeah, you can kind of just AFK in situations like this, be completely fine. Just have to make sure I don't have Untiring selected, but the energy shield recovery is Divine Shield. So you can see I currently have 10,000 energy regen per second, and that's just with 2400 armor, and then obviously all the physical damage reduction from endurance charges as well. And yeah, that in combination with the Defiance, we're able to just kind of chill in a huge pack of monsters. And you know, whenever you feel like it, you can kill all of them in one hit. So we'll clear this one real quick too. Maybe see if we can find a bigger pack here. Kite some more stuff together. We turn on the Abyss, sure. See if we can get them to start doing some damage. Yeah, I think this is bigger than the last pack, and we still seem to be doing fine. So yeah, that is pretty much the build there. So yeah, I guess we'll get into the POB now. This character compared to the POB is probably like 1/3 of the damage, if that. So yeah, what's different than that POB? We're going to be an Ancestral Commander. This node is pretty much the same as Jug, just more armor, and then it also doesn't have Can't Be Stunned, so we have to make up for that with Unwavering Stance. This is still, POB obviously isn't updated yet, since the patch notes came out like less than 24 hours ago as of recording this, so I just added in the config here, -1 to maximum endurance charges. The Defiance just raises the effective hit pool, which isn't a super relevant stat in PoB anyway, but 10% Defiance with the amount of mitigation this build's going to have should be enough. And then lastly, I guess before we could have taken this node, but this node is pretty much dead with the new patch. I don't think it was really necessary anyway, especially if you have Ashes of the Stars. It gives you plenty of Warcry cooldown recovery rate, but either way, now we're going to be taking Born Under Fire, and I did do this in the config as well. I just Fizz taken as fire, but just to keep in mind, the Fizz max hit is while the enemy's close to you. It's going to be considerably lower if they're further away from you, so that's just something to keep in mind, and it's usually pretty easy to get that, since, you know, a Leap Slam, Frostblink, and Consecrated Path of Endurance has built-in movement, so you pretty much should always be able to be on top of the enemy. Consecrated Path also gets increased damage for being closer to the target, so if you're trying to be tanky and do higher single target, you want to be right on top of the enemy. You'll take less physical damage and you'll do more damage to them. So yeah, that is the Ascendancy. For this skill, almost for sure better than a Juggernaut, but yeah, I think it'll actually be a little bit better to go over the items first, so more of the skill tree makes sense. So in the demo I used an axe, but I have later found out that it's much better to use an Eventuality Rod, because you can get 2 endurance charges from this, and the power charge isn't bad either. But yeah, the most important thing is that you can get 2 endurance charges from your weapon. The damage should be a little bit higher because the heist implicits, or the heist enchantments rather, don't work in PoB still. But the other thing is the staff nodes are a lot better than the axe nodes for this build, at least in like the super endgame. I would probably still level with an axe and just do like a traditional Earth Shatter Slammer, and then, you know, once you get enough endurance charges you can transfer over to Consecrated Path. Then once you get enough accuracy and crit chance and crit multi, you can probably swap over to this. If you are having trouble with accuracy, you've crafted one of these but you're just struggling to get accuracy, whether it's here or on other pieces, you can, instead of the hybrid % fizz and accuracy, you could craft Hits Can't Be Evaded. It is a pretty big damage loss, but then you just don't have to worry about accuracy at all. It can be a pretty decent mid to early late game thing to do. It would also let you, instead of crafting accuracy on the suffix, it would let you have critical strike multiplier, which is also pretty good, so that's also an option for the staff, but I think this is going to be the best one. Technically, critical strike multiplier is also better than attack speed for damage, but I think without the attack speed on the staff, this build doesn't really just feel good to play, just in terms of like leap slamming around. With the cooldown on Conk Path and Fist of War, it is better to attack every couple seconds, but just not taking forever to actually do the attack feels a lot better. So I'm going to go with trying to get attack speed, but critical strike multiplier is also fine there. And then Echoes of Creation, you can use this like as soon as you can get it, even if you are like leveling Earth Shatter. Obviously it's a really good helmet for that too. The only roll that really matters on this is the 15% more damage. You want that to be 15 and not any lower. We have so much fizz mitigation, the downside really doesn't matter. You can get that anywhere from 15 to 20 and it should be fine. In terms of the corruptions, the 90% cost and reservation multiplier is very good for this build. The maximum power charge doesn't matter that much, but I just want to show like the best things you could possibly get. But yeah, don't worry too much about the power charge, but you definitely do want to make the cost and reservation multiplier a priority. And then for the chest, pretty basic outside of the essence modifier, reduced extra damage from critical strikes. This build is going to have 14 endurance charges, so that pretty much just makes you immune to critical strikes with 1 mod on your chest. For crafting this, I would try and fracture that mod first, and then you can just spam dense fossils until you get the prefixes, and then reforge chaos until you get a good chaos res, and hopefully another res with it. You could end on a crafted resistance as well. And then you'll have to conflict orb to get the 2 to all max resistances, and then whether it's 10 or 11% taken as fire, it's not that big of a difference, especially since we have 50 from our Ascendancy. But once again, just showing the best things you possibly can get, even if you don't necessarily need it. And then for the gloves, again, another very basic piece here, kind of just covering the basics: life, res, armor, accuracy. And then this maximum cold res you may not necessarily need depending on what you get on your grafts. There's a spot on the tree here. You could swap this over to cold if you got like lightning res on a graft or something. And then you could get another damage implicit there. But if you get everything right, I think this is the best place to put that last +1 max res. And then your boots, these are a very important slot in this build because you get another maximum endurance charge and a lot of fire resistance. You'll see why we have so much fire resistance in just a second once we get to the rings. These technically could be better, because you can get a corrupted +1 endurance boot, so you could potentially get 2 endurance charges from the boot, but that's like so insanely hard to get. There is the Death's Door boots that give +1 endurance, and that's a unique item, so probably easier to corrupt multiple of them and potentially get that. But I think these are going to be better anyway with the synergy we have with the fire resistance. So yeah, these are what I would go for. If you do end up running charge stealing maps, it's good to carry a Ralakesh's Impatience. Doesn't necessarily have to have the max endurance. You can just carry a regular one with you, and then if you run into enemies that steal charges, you could just swap into this. You do lose a decent amount of damage, but it's fine. You know, you don't lose all of your damage from having the charges being taken. So yeah, I would mostly wear these, but if you have to run content that steals your charges, you can swap into a Ralakesh. And then Ashes of the Stars. This is a pretty crazy one with a corrupt. You don't need the corrupt, once again just showing how far you could possibly go. But yeah, try and get +1 and 30 at the very least on an uncorrupted one, and then apply an additional curse is going to be the best corrupt, but any corrupt that's beneficial and not attributes is going to be good, because we're running Supreme Ostentation on an Elegant Hubris, so we don't need attributes. So yeah, whatever you can get there would be good. And then Anointing Vigor, which is the +1 max endurance on the bottom of the tree. I think it's just easier to anoint that than Path down there, since there's a lot of staff nodes on the top of the tree that you want. And then the rings, we have a +1 max endurance charge, rare ring. You can also use a Calm Sign on a budget. Early leveling, just 2 Calm Signs is probably going to be the best, as long as you can solve resistances elsewhere. But yeah, just life, more fire is. The gain fizzes extra fire is an essence mod. The easiest way to craft this ring is probably just spamming that essence until you get 2 of these mods, and then multi-modding, and you can get at least 5 of these mods, pretty much guaranteed. And then Enmity's Embrace, probably the biggest damage dealing single item in this build. We're getting currently 147 fire penetration from this, which is an insane amount of damage. You do lose a maximum endurance charge because you can't use another one of these or a Calandra's Touch, but I think it's definitely worth it for the amount of damage you get from this. But yeah, this is pretty much the build around item here outside of all the endurance charge stacking stuff, so you definitely do need this. And this is kind of why we're doing the no attributes keystone as well. It takes a lot to scale this much fire resistance with the 65% reduced fire resistance. And then Mage Blood, the best belt for most builds in the game. Not required, but very good to have, and synergizes extremely well with Enmity's Embrace, and then obviously lets you get 90 all-res very easily, and then a Diamond Flask to help us get crit capped as well. Up until you get Mage Blood, you could use like a Hunter rare belt with life and percent life. You could use an Arn's Anguish, which in that case you would have to use Ralakesh boots, so you still get the benefits from endurance charges, but Arn's is a really good option as well. But yeah, eventually you do want to work up to the Mage Blood, and then the one thing you use, it's not a flask, is a tincture. I keep this off because it kind of inflates the damage, because realistically you're only going to have the tincture up for a few hits on a boss. It's not part of your damage like the majority of the time, but it is a lot of damage. It's 26 million damage by itself, so it is definitely worth having. I leave it off in the POV to not inflate the damage number too much. But yeah, this is what you're going for here, just increased effect, penetration, and then trying to get the implicit to as close to 100% as you can. And yeah, just press this when you can during boss fights, and it will be a lot of extra damage. And then Grafts, I actually overlooked these for a while. I just kind of did it as the last thing right before I made the video pretty much, and actually had to test a few things because there's some cool interactions here. This Graft here, the Flame Caller's off Graft, this is the one I would say is completely mandatory. The Call the Pyre skill covers enemies in ash, and on top of that, this thing gives you, if it's close to perfectly rolled like this, it gives you 60 to 70% increased damage. And then covered in ash, if we go over here to the config, we turn this on and off, it gives us 15 million DPS. So yeah, just from a Graft. And then you can see here the increased damage is also giving us another 6 million, so like over 20 million damage from a Graft. Pretty crazy. I definitely did not expect that. There's not really that many other good ways to get covered in ash. You can get it from the amulet slot, but Ashes of the Stars is still better. But yeah, getting it just from the extra thing from the League mechanic, very cool. I would get the suffixes for area of effect and an extra 2 pillars. Essentially, it shoots out pillars of fire in front of you, and then the things that get hit by it get covered in ash. So once again, just like for Consecrated Path, and for your Ascendancy node, you want to be right on top of them to do as much damage and be as tanky as possible. And then the second graft, there's quite a few options here. I have them all in here. The best two, I think, are this one, the Molten Zoff graft. Once again, just 50% increased fire damage because it's a Zoff graft. And then the Heart of Flame is kind of like a mini Molten Shell, so that's not bad too. And, 20% increased armor, also decent. What I think is the second best option is the Aegis Tool graft. It has 6 all-res, so, helps with Enmity's Embrace, up to, I think, 18% critical strike multiplier. And then also this Preserving Stillness. It's when you inflict exposure, which is very easy for us to do. We'll get to that on the skill tree when we go over the cluster jewels. It gives you another like mini Molten Shell kind of thing, but it only takes elemental damage. But importantly, it also gives you 25 all-res. So that's a total of 31 all-res, which is like 12, I think, fire penetration. So also a lot of damage from a graft. 18 crit multi and 12 fire penetration. Very good. This one does actually beat it out. The 25 all-res is based on you having like a 1 to 2,000 shield up. So, if you inflict exposure, then you get hit really hard right after that. Then you effectively don't get most of the damage benefit. So I would rather go with the Molten Zoff graft, but if you drop something like this out of the tree, obviously use it. But yeah, I think overall this one's a little bit better since it's just active all the time. It's just 50% increased fire damage. You don't have to inflict exposure or anything. And then there's a few other good options as well. But yeah, I won't go over all of them. Those are for sure the top 3. I would 100% do a Flamecaller Zoff graft, and the other one is kind of, pick your favorite. And then we'll go over the cluster jewels once we get to the skill tree. For unique jewels, we're running Sublime Determination. As long as determinations are only aura, we get +1 max endurance, which is the main thing we're scaling here, so definitely want to use that. Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame, we're using Unflinching, which is the Juggernaut node for +1 max endurance charge. Once again, endurance charges is the main thing we're scaling, and also Unflinching is pretty much the best way in the game at generating endurance charges. That's really nice to have as well. We're going to have plenty of other ways to generate them before that, but just makes it that much easier. Thread of Hope you don't necessarily need. Once again, I'll go over that once we get to the skill tree. Same thing with the Elegant Hubris. So yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and go over to the tree. Supreme Ostentation, like I said, we get no bonuses from attributes and we ignore attribute requirements. And also, this can roll some very good notables for us. 50% fire resistance, which 17 fire penetration, very good. And then a 10% increased damage per endurance charge, which, like I said, we have 14 endurance charges. That's 140% increased damage from a single node. With this placement right here, the most important ones to get are these two, because they're just single points. And then I have a Thread of Hope for these 3 here. One's fire res, one's endurance charge, and then one is increased fire damage with attack skills. There's a lot of good ones. There's also physical damage ones. There's kind of a lot of things you can do here. This is the best one I found when I played it in Mercenaries League, but there's a lot of options here. You could do Impossible Escape, either Avatar of Fire or Iron Will. The nice thing with Impossible Escape is you don't get the downside, the minus all res, which does matter. I mean, we're resistant stacking. This is still like a huge damage increase overall, even with that downside. But yeah, you can get Impossible Escape for Avatar of Fire and then focus on getting these 4 nodes, because that'll let you get these 2 nodes as well, which on the one I have, these 2 are completely useless. And then that also lets you save a point on the tree, because you could take these two nodes instead of these nodes here. It would save you that 3rd point, which you could put like here or here or something. There's a lot of places you could throw an extra point for some damage or defense. And then the other option, Iron Will, would let you get these 2. This one's good for on this one, but this one does nothing. You can use the Timeless Jewel Finder here, put in the nodes you want. There is also Crit Multi as well. I forgot about that. But yeah, you should also be able to like search one that you find on trade or drop on the ground. I guess you could just socket it in if you found it on the ground, but yeah, you should be able to search the numbers on here to test them like before you buy them. Depending on how much these are, you don't want to be spending 10 to 20, maybe even 30 divines just to test one of these. So I always use the calculator here in Path of Building. And then if you have the Iron Will one as well, you also get 25% physical damage here and also Constitution. So honestly, there's a ton of good options here. This is the best one I was able to find. There's probably another good one. There might even be a better one. So, just look at what's cheap, what you can find. As long as you're getting at least a few of these, it's definitely going to be worth it. To start, it's okay to just get none of this. Like, you can just have Supreme Ostentation and it's fine. Ideally, you can at least get like one of these to do something. And then if all you have is 1 or 2 of these, you can just use like a rare jewel here or something for just generic damage. But yeah, that's the setup with the Elegant Hubris there, which the nice thing about that is it lets us tattoo our entire tree with fire resistance. Now, these were very expensive last league. You do need them here. So these 6, I believe, yeah, with the Foulborn Red Dream, which is the reason they were expensive last league. This lets fire resistance and all res also give increased life, which is really good here. You get those 6 nodes. This gives fire res and all res, and then you have diamond skin as well. So we're resistance stacking, and this turns all of that resistance stacking into life, which is really good. These 6, I would say you for sure want to spend the money for the fire resistance ones, but for everything else, there's a lot of different 5% damage ones, physical damage, fire damage, and I believe melee damage as well. Yeah, all of those are pretty much comparable. They're only like 1 to 200k less, so like it will add up, but I mean, overall, if your entire tree is covered in melee damage, that's still going to be really good. So spend the money to get the fire resistance here, but if you want to save some money for other items, you can tattoo the rest of the tree in just percent damage. The dexterity node, I think it's just the one. Yeah, if you had more nodes, you would do this too, but yeah, global accuracy is going to be the best one for dexterity. And then for the intelligence nodes, it's increased effect of herald buffs. We just have Herald of Ash, but it still does quite a bit of damage even with just that, so that's kind of why we're using Supreme Ostentation, so we can tattoo the whole tree, so we can stack even more resistance for the Enmity's Embrace. And then we have the staff nodes and the crit staff nodes, and the masteries you want to take are this one for 18% life, and then this one for 30% increased defenses. And then we're taking the regular crit node we can as well with the Rune Graft of the Fortress. This is yet another reason to ignore attributes. We get 40% increased global defenses. And then we also have the Rage and Warcry tech here that pretty much every slam build uses at this point. I think you get Rage per 5 power on the Warcries, and you have a minimum of 10 power. This works with auto exertion, so you pretty much just always have capped Rage, and then you get the plus 10 max as well. I think this one, Measured Fury, is the best Warcry note to take. Well, at least for this build, this one is usually the best, but it's covered up by our Timeless Jewel. I think this one is the next best. It gets an additional Exert, which is really good with specifically Intimidating Cry, because that typically only exerts 2 attacks, making that 3 is a pretty big difference. This does inflate the damage number for some reason. I'm not sure why, but yeah, so damage might be like slightly inflated because of this node. Maybe that is because of like Intimidating Cry or something like that. It assumes it can get it more often with the average damage, but even if it was 0, I think this is still going to be the best one to take. Then we have this over here just to cap our max resistances, get stun immune, and then an extra jewel socket. And for the cluster jewels, there are 3 different ones for this build. This one probably being the best, Overlord, so it's 30% increased damage, and we fortify on hit. Very good for defenses. We don't have to spend 5 points to get that, or a support gem, just 1 node on a cluster, and it's already a good node with 30% increased damage. And then you want to do Fuel the Fight for Mana Leech is the other one, and then the third one in the back is Heavy Hitter. So that's the first 3 combination there. I guess I just forgot to do it. You can also get fire resistance here as well as that 4th mod. And then our other large cluster jewel, this is the next most important one. It's going to be Doriani's Lesson, Master of Fire, and Prismatic Heart. The ones we're actually taking are Doriani's Lesson and Master of Fire. So this one is just nearby enemies have fire exposure. Very nice. You don't even have to hit first or anything. There's another one I think called Corrosive Elements. It gives you a 25% chance to inflict exposure. That's also fine, but this one is effectively 100% chance, so this one's definitely better. To do the most damage, we always want to be nearby them anyway. And then Doriani's Lesson, this gives us Life Leech and some elemental damage. And then for the last small cluster, you want Graceful Execution and Martial Prowess, just generic damage, attack speed, crit chance. Do get some attributes here, it doesn't really matter. The rest of it's still good enough. And then, yeah, that one is Brutal Infamy, Graceful Execution, Martial Prowess to get that combination. And then all of them need to be 8 passives, so you only have to spend 5 to get the 2 jewel sockets. And then for our medium cluster jewel, you want to get double res and lead by example mob mentality. You don't necessarily need the res, it's just, you know, nice to have. And then extra res for Enmity's Embrace as usual. But yeah, these 2 are very build enabling. Once you get quality on your Warcries, Ashes of the Stars, and this node here, get you a little bit of extra cooldown recovery. These are pretty much always online, just this single mob mentality, 5% chance. It does take a little while to build up, maybe like 5 to 10 seconds or something. This is pretty much just 100% uptime on all charges, which is extremely good. And another thing with this, and more specifically the rage one, you want to have all of your war cries have different qualities, so they all like pop at different times. It makes it so you don't inherently lose rage as often and helps you keep your charges up as well. And then lead by example, as long as you're war crying at least every 4 seconds, which you definitely will be, you'll always have onslaught. So yeah, extremely good medium cluster there. Even if you don't have any large clusters and you're like level 70 or whatever, and you can get one of these for cheap, very good just to throw in a permanent onslaught and all charges. And then the small clusters are both going to be mana reservation efficiency. You want increased effect, life, fire resistance, and then whatever resistance you need. I did some chaos resistance here just to make sure that's capped. Yeah, so each node will give you 8% mana reservation efficiency with as many war cries as we're doing, and we're using 3 auras as well. If you're okay with pressing 1 or 2 war cries, you can skip these altogether, or maybe do 1 and a rare jewel or something like that. I personally think it feels the best to press no war cries and just, you know, leap, slam as few buttons as possible. I think feels the best, but some people are okay with pressing 1 to 2 war cries, and that does save you a lot of reservation. You're kind of just paying for convenience there. But yeah, kind of up to you how much of this you feel you need. There is also the rune graft of treachery as well that you could throw somewhere, or a fire build that's using determination, so giving that to our enemies doesn't really matter. And yeah, that is, I think, it for the cluster jewels. Avatar of Fire. This finishes your conversion. The Consecrated Path does the first half, and then this does the second half. You pretty much want to have this as soon as you're using Consecrated Path of Endurance, and then the rest just life nodes, some max res here on the mastery, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the tree. So we can go over to the skills here. First, our main skill, Consecrated Path of Endurance. You do want this in the weapon so you can get the full benefit from the staff masteries. You get as much life as you can, and the links are going to be Overexertion, Endurance Charge on Melee Stun, Awaken Melee Physical Damage, Pulverize, and Fist of War. And then I have Awakened Elemental Damage with attacks here. If you have to run an Elemental Reflect map, you can. You just have to swap this in. The best swap is probably Pulverize, but yeah, if you want to run a Reflect map, swap that, and then you have to take out Infernal Cry as well, and then you should be good for a Reflect map. But yeah, speaking of, onto the War Cries. This is the other 6 link you're going to put in your body armor. Infernal Cry, Intimidating Cry, Rallying Cry, Seismic Cry, Auto Exertion, and an Enlighten 4. The Enlighten 4 also kind of applies the same rules, the cluster jewels. You can go down to an Enlighten 3 on this and the auras. That just means you'll probably have to press a War Cry. With Overexertion, you just want to be using as many war cries as possible. They all have pretty good buffs on their own. Intimidating Cry being the highest for damage, since it's just guaranteed double damage for exerted attacks, but you definitely want to use all of them. And then for the last one, we have Battle Mage's Cry, which we're using to apply our curses. If you don't have the Corrupt on the amulet and you just have 1 curse, I would use Assassin's Mark. To replace the flammability as the 4th link here, you could use Enlighten if you want to save on some mana, or you could do Enduring Cry unlinked, so it's not auto-exerted. You just want to auto-exert the Battle Mage's Cry. But yeah, you could use Enduring Cry just as some extra endurance charge generation. And then in the helmet, we have our main auras, which is why we need that Socket and Reservation Multiplier Corrupt on the helmet. We're doing Determination because we're Sublime Determination, and then also a lot of armor and thus physical damage reduction, and then Herald of Ash for some extra damage and clear, and then Blood and Sand. While you're in Blood Stance, extremely good damage for a 10% aura. If you want better clear as well, you could swap to Sand Stance. I mean, you saw the AoE a minute ago, and the AoE is going to be even bigger once you get to 14 endurance charges, so I don't really see a reason to leave Blood Stance. The AoE is probably going to be big enough, and if you are somehow able to get even more mana reservation efficiency, you could swap out this Herald of Purity for the Enlighten. But yeah, I think this is probably the aura setup I'm going to land on. I don't think it's really worth it to make the sacrifices you need to make to get this Herald of Purity, but I do want to leave it there as an option. And then the last 4 link is just going to kind of be your movement skills, Leap Slam, Faster Attacks, and Frost Blink. I do think you need both of these. Frost Blink, just that instant teleport, and then Leap Slam for just getting around for the most part, and then Consecrated Path of Endurance has that built-in movement too, but I don't think it's worth giving up either one of those. And then for the guard skill, Immortal Call is going to be your best in terms of total max hit, but Molten Shell and Vol Molten Shell will be pretty good too. Kind of just depends on the content you're doing. Like, you know, if you're trying to work up to like face tanking Maven memory game, it's going to be a mortal call for sure. But if it's multi-hit things like, you know, general mapping or like an Exarch ball phase or something like that, Molten Shell and Vol Molten Shell is probably going to be better. You should have way more total uptime with Molten Shell. So yeah, that's the guard skills there. Still pretty decent max hits even without them, but yeah, and I have these other skills here just to show you can use pretty much any slam. Consecrated Path of Endurance is going to be the best, but you know, if you still enjoy Volcanic Fissure of Snaking, it's fine. It still does pretty good damage. Tectonic Slam, also pretty good. Earth Shatter, you can run physical slams on this build. It just takes a little bit more investment. On a glove implicit, you can get physical converted to fire. You have it on Avatar of Fire, and then you can also take these 5 points here and get another 40% converted to fire. It just takes more investment to get 100% converted to fire on this setup, but it's totally doable. And then you may ask, why are we not playing Tectonic Slam of Cataclysm? It does 20 million damage on a 1 link. This is a better skill in terms of damage, but it's bugged. So, yeah, it just straight up doesn't work. It doesn't remove endurance charges. It is just a garbage Tectonic Slam all of the time, which sucks. I hope it gets fixed in 328. That's probably what I'll play in 328 if slams overall don't get nerfed and the bug gets fixed. But yeah, don't try Tectonic Slam of Cataclysm. It's bugged. So I was partway through editing the video and I saw that they did actually do some bug fixes, and Tectonic Slam of Cataclysm is actually in here. So as far as I knew, the bug was that it wasn't removing endurance charges and doing additional damage or area of effect, but you know, I'm not a programmer or anything, so maybe this was the whole issue. So I did want to talk about if we get in and Tectonic Slam of Cataclysm does work fine, what do you have to do to use it? So the skill links are pretty much the same, but the important difference here is that Tectonic Slam of Cataclysm actually spends the endurance charges. It doesn't actually just get the benefit from having them like Consecrated Path of Endurance does. So since you actually have to spend the endurance charges, you're definitely going to have to use Relic Ashes and Patience, preferably with a +1 max endurance charge. This is so when you spend all 14 of your endurance charges, you don't just delete all of your defense to do damage. That does also mean you can't use Arn's Anguish because Tectonic Slam of Cataclysm can't spend brutal charges. It can only spend endurance charges. And then also, I wouldn't recommend doing Tectonic Slam of Cataclysm without the Flesh Flame Unflinching. This has a line that says, when you would gain an endurance charge, you have a chance to gain up to your maximum endurance charges. The only 2 places I know to get this are this note here, Unflinching, and on a Precursor's Emblem ring, which comes from Delve. I don't expect either of those things to be super easy to get. I'm not sure how popular Unflinching is going to be, but either way, I don't think Tectonic Slam of Cataclysm is going to feel good without that mod. So in this league, when you can't be a jug, it's pretty much reserved for like the uber endgame when you have that. But if you do get to that point, it does do considerably more damage. It would be a little bit less there, quite a bit less, because you have to switch to Relic Ashes and Patience, but a very fun skill to use. I mean, it's been a while since it's been bugged for like a league and a half, I think. So haven't used it in a little while, so hopefully it is fixed and we'll get to try it towards the end of this league. But yeah, just want to show that you can use other slams too. If you want to get some variety or you like another slam better, you can totally do that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. If you have any questions, let me know. Hope you guys enjoy playing it if you try it out. And hopefully a few days in, I'll start doing some videos on farming strategies in Phrecia. Very excited because you can get ones that are not really possible with the Atlas tree, as the numbers go quite a lot higher with the idols. And yeah, should be fun. So thank you guys for watching, and hope you have a great rest of your day and a great start to your Phrecia League.